pleased to see all of you. I want to introduce myself. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sonjah Stanley Niaah, Director of the Center for Reparation Research at the University of the West Indies. I want to greet you all from the Center for Reparation Research and the Museums Division of the University of the West Indies. Greetings to friends of the UWI Museum, greetings to friends of the Center for Reparation Research, our network of scholars, our advisory board. And indeed, in my capacity as director, we are pleased to partner with the UWI Museum yet again on another webinar focused on mutual interest, this time on the theme of colonial collecting. As members of the UWI community, it is important to recognize and declare that the land on which we operate as an institution of higher learning is the original or traditional territory of many peoples. The UWI acknowledges the First Nation comprising the indigenous people who were displaced by the Columbus Project and general European colonization, and the hundreds of Africans who toiled for more than 100 years as enslaved people on the old Papine sugar estate. The UWI recognizes their labor and sacrifices in preserving this land that has enabled the establishment of a university that now provides opportunities for many of their descendants to receive an education that they themselves were indeed denied. This is one of many webinars which we have engaged in organizing as a way to bring attention to the CARICOM 10-point plan on reparations. It's a development plan. This is a plan currently being revised to attend to gaps in the original plan. Areas such as repatriation of objects, archives, and the like are crucial in the scheme of righting historical wrongs. Indeed, many communities have a long-standing demand for the repatriation of colonial collections. Several Western European nations have initiated repatriations of archival, art, material culture, natural science collections, and human remains. We are all implicated in this story. But we are not even at the tip of the iceberg in tackling this issue. Many of these collections acquired during both military, as a matter of fact, colonial wars waged against former colonies during economic expansion or during withdrawal of colonial powers reflect tense histories of violence, exploitation, equity, and erasure. This panel will explore the role of repatriation as a component of restitution and reparatory justice in the Caribbean. And I'm broadly defining the Caribbean now because, of course, when we think about the Caribbean, there's the Caribbean diaspora. There's also the way in which the Caribbean implicates these very colonial powers that we will discuss today. It explores different ways in which repatriation can occur and posits new futures for the return of cultural items to the Caribbean, broadly defined. I'm pleased to welcome you, our audience online here on the Zoom and on YouTube. This webinar is being streamed on the Center for Reparation Research's YouTube channel, as well as the UWI Museums channel, and you will be able to share with your colleagues, not only in terms of the Zoom that will be posted later, but certainly the YouTube if they have missed in some way, not able to attend now. So we have a very exciting lineup of speakers who I will introduce momentarily. I just want to highlight that the program will run with each speaker allotted 10 minutes. I know that a joint presentation from Camiel and Arminda will take about 15 minutes. Once all the speakers have engaged us, we will have reflections from Dr. Tara Inniss, along with a segment for questions and answers. You can, of course, post your questions already. The chat is engaged. You can post your questions there. And of course, remember to follow us, the UWI Museum on Instagram, the Center for Reparation Research on Instagram, and on X, and on the platforms that we find ourselves as the UWI departments. Let me first introduce Dr. Katarina Jacobson. She has studied archaeology at the University of Paris, Pantheon-Sorbonne. She holds a master's degree in archaeology, specializing in the pre-Columbian period in the Caribbean. She joined the European Research Project and ERC-funded Synergy Nexus 1492 as a PhD student in 2013. And her PhD focuses on an archaeoanthropological study of ceramics in multicultural Caribbean societies from the pre-colonial period to the present. Katarina has worked at the Musée Départemental d'Archéologie Précolombienne Edgar Claire in Guadeloupe as a collections manager. She currently holds the position of director of the Musée Municipal Sonjah, Perse, and is also co-curator and international coordinator of the international exhibition Caribbean Ties and co-founder of the Local Voices movement. Katarina, of course, participates in various heritage enhancement initiatives and is since the end of 2022 vice president of the board of directors of the Museum Association of the Caribbean. Welcome, Katarina. Arminda Franken is based in Aruba and led the National Archaeological Museum of Aruba until 2016. She's currently active as a heritage professional of the Caribbean, part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, as advisor to the Mondrian Fund and the Dutch Fund for Culture Participation. Her heritage-focused enterprise, Camiel, was established in January 2023. Camiel de Kom's work and studies focus on museums, colonial collections, digital heritage and memory, subjects with which he came into contact growing up in Amsterdam and through his Surinamese family heritage. He graduated in art history and museum studies, MA and BA, with a minor in programming at the University of Amsterdam. This interest in programming came from working on a digital archive at the Oudkerk in Amsterdam, where he noticed the importance of technical knowledge. He is a digital heritage coach for the Bureau of the Colonial Collections Consortium in the Netherlands, and currently the consortium creates a data hub for colonial collections for stakeholders from countries of origin and provenance research. Now, I hope I'm going to pronounce your name correctly, Rita. Rita Fooh is the director of the National Archives, Suriname, and the part-time lecturer at the History Department of the Anton de Kom University of Suriname. She's actively involved in the preservation of the national documentary heritage and involved in large digitization projects. From 2010 to 2017, she was coordinating the repatriation of the Surinamese archives from the Netherlands to Suriname. Currently, she's the co-chair of the Caribbean Heritage Emergency Network, a subsidiary of the Caribbean branch of the International Council on Archives, CARBICA. Our next panelist, Mrs. Charlene Riley, right at home, is an archivist and information governance professional with wide experience in both professional fields. She has held various positions with responsibility for archives and records management programs at organizations in the government, sphere, financial and higher education sectors. She currently functions as a university archivist for the University of the West Indies, where she's responsible for the coordination of the UWI's archives and records management programs across all campuses of the university. She has recently authored a book chapter titled Archives and Public Policy Imperatives in Trinidad and Tobago, the Post-Colonial Challenge of Learning from Our Past and Protecting Our Future. And last but not least, our respondent, Dr. Tara Inniss, is a lecturer in the Department of History and Philosophy at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus in Barbados and director of the Caribbean Heritage Network. The areas of focus for her teaching and research include history of medicine, history of social policy, and heritage and social development. In 2002 to 2003, she received a split-site Commonwealth PhD scholarship to study at the UWI University of Manchester program. In 2007, she completed a Master's in International Social Development at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. And what is not here in what I'm sharing about Dr. Inniss is that she's closely connected to the Masters in Reparatory Justice being offered jointly by the University of Glasgow and the University of the West Indies. And we thank her for her services there. So now you've been introduced to all of our panelists. And I want to now get right into the meat of the matter and invite our very first speaker to go ahead. I think everybody would be enabled to share, that you can go ahead and share your presentation if you have a visual to do so.
Okay. I'm the first one. Then I want already to say sorry for my English because I'm French. Then you will have to follow a bit well. Then good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to this panel. Today, I would like to speak about the French case within the wider debate on restitution in the Caribbean. More specifically, I will look at the French overseas territories and especially the French Caribbean one. My starting point is simple. The French Caribbean cannot be understood outside the wider French policy on restitution. At the same time, it reveals one of its limits very clearly. So my aim today is to begin with the general French framework, then to explain why the overseas territory matters, and finally to show how the French Caribbean gives us a specific perspective on restitution. First of all, let's begin with the general French context. In France, restitution has long limited by a major legal principle, which is the inalienability of public collection. That means that objects held in public collection cannot easily be removed from them. For many years, France dealt with restitution through specific laws adopted one case at the time. A first important example was the return of Sonjah Bartam to South Africa in 2002. Another step came in 2010 with the return of the Maori head to New Zealand. Then in 2020, France adopted a law allowing the return of royal objects to Benin and to Senegal. Since 2023, the framework has become more general. A new law created a procedure for restitution of human remains held in public collection. Then, in January 2026, a broader bill and a strong public focus on provenance research confirmed that France was moving further in this direction. So France is changing, but this evolution is still mainly designed for return to foreign states. But to understand the French case properly, we also need to look at the overseas territories. And I think that for non-French people, it's complicated to understand. We are not all institutionally identical. And we are not all at the same relationship with the French state. Some are more closely integrated in the Republic, like Guadeloupe, while others have more autonomy, like Martinique or French Guyana, and some have more specific status. But beside this diversity, we share something important. We are shaped by colonial history and remain part of the French political space. This matters because French restitution framework has largely been built around relation between sovereign states. The overseas territories complicate this framework because they bring colonial history into a space that is still legally and politically inside the Republic. So we are in search of, if we want to understand both the reach and the limits of French restitution policies. The French Caribbean must be understood within this wider French framework. It's not outside the national policy on restitution, but fully part of it. At the same time, it makes visible one of its most important blind spots. The French Caribbean raised a different kind of question. Here, the territories concerned are Caribbean, shaped by colonial collective, and still politically linked to France. So the problem is not only how objects and human remains can be returned across borders, it is also how return can be thought when the territory of origin remains inside the same state that now holds them. This is why the French Caribbean gives us such specific and important perspective in the wider Caribbean debate. I will take 3 cases to explain those specific cases for France. And the first one is the case of French Guyana, and more specifically, the claim linked to the indigenous Kalina ancestor. Here, we are not speaking about human remains in an abstract or neutral way. We are speaking about ancestors we were moved in a colonial context, transferred to the mainland, exposed and exhibit in a human zoo as part of colonial display and racialized form of ethnographic exhibition. This is why this case is important. The claim is not only about ownership, it's about dignity, rehumanization, and the right to bury the dead according to local tradition and respect. This case also reveals a very clear legal and political problem. The 2023 law created a general procedure for the restitution of human remains, but only when the request comes from a foreign state, as I was saying. French Guyana is not a foreign one. So the Kalina case remains unresolved. A project began to take shape, but it was suspended because of political instability in France at the moment when it was supposed to be to move forward. The other case is, my second case is about New Caledonia and the return of the skull of the chief Atai in 2014. Atai was not simply an individual who remains entire a collection. He became an important symbol of Kanak resistance to French colonization. This is why the return of his skull carried such strong political and symbolic meanings. It recognized both a history of colonial violence and the importance of restoring dignity to a major figure of resistance. This case is very important because it shows that return within the French political space is possible. But it shows also limits to the current system. The return of Atai did not create a general legal mechanism that could easily be used for other similar cases. It remains a specific response shaped by political negotiation and by the particular history of New Caledonia. So Atai is both a precedent and a limit. It proves that international return is possible, but it also shows that France still lacks a stable and general procedure for such cases. The third case is Ansbele in Martinique. This case comes from archaeology, and more specifically from the excavation of human remains at the site linked to colonial slavery. So here, the remains are not coming from a museum collection in the same way that the other case of Guyana. They were brought to light through archaeological work, and this immediately raised ethical, memorial, and political questions. Civil society reacts strongly, and the debate was not only about scientific study. It was also about respect, local dignity, and the need to restore dignity to the dead. What is especially important in this case is that the process led to a local funerary restitution with reburial in 2023 as part of a memorial framework. So Ansbele brought a new discussion. It shows that return does not mean a classic transfer of property. Sometimes return means reburial, local recognition, or the reinscription of the dead within the territory and its history. If we step back, a broader pattern appears. France now gives much more attention to provenance, to spoliation, and to the special status of human remains. This is an important change, and it should be recognized. But the legal and political framework still responds more easily to claim coming from outside France than to claim emerging from within the overseas territories. This is where the imbalance appears. The overseas territories stand in an in-between position because we are fully inside the Republic and still marked by colonial disposition. So the real question is not only whether return is possible, it is also who has the authority to ask for it, who is recognized as a legitimate voice, and who has the power to decide what happens next. Then my practical proposal is that the current French framework works better when a request from a foreign state, but overseas cases do not also fit this model. That is why France should consider a specific mechanism for overseas territories designed for return or transfer within the French national space. Such a mechanism could make several responses possible depending on the case. It could allow the return of collection to the territory of origin. It could allow the transfer of custody to the local museum or heritage institution. It could also allow reburial in case involving human remains. And it could support shared responsibility between national institutions and local actors. The aims would not be to erase legal differences between territories. The aims would be to create a workable path where no clear path currently exists. To conclude, I will say that the French Caribbean offers a very specific lens on the wide Caribbean debate on restitution. It showed that colonial collecting is not always followed by political separation. In some cases, the territories from which object and human remains were taken still belong to the same state that now holds them. This is why the French Caribbean matters so much. It helps us to see that return is not only an international issue. It can also be an internal Caribbean issues shaped by unequal power, colonial history, and the uneven distribution of heritage authority. So if we want to understand restitution in the Caribbean more fully, we also need to include those intranational cases. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katarina. I think the first presentation, you have laid some very important points, salient points on the table. The matter of restitution isn't always international. It doesn't always involve movement of an object only. But in the case of ancestral remains, there are multiple issues, complex issues that in fact implicate things like ritual and burial. So thank you so much for bringing that to our attention. We'll now have Arminda and Camiel presenting.
Happy Friday, everyone. My colleague well, Camiel will share the, yes, there we go. Yes, thank you, Camiel. My colleague and esteemed collaborator, Camiel de Kom, and I would like to tell you a bit today about our experiences with restitutions of collections within the Dutch Caribbean with a focus on the data hub for colonial collections. The Caribbean part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands is formed by 6 islands. Bonaire, Curaçao, and Aruba are adjacent to the South American mainland, and the Windward Islands, St. Eustachia, Saba, and St. Martyr are in the northern part of the Caribbean region. Saba, Statia, and Bonaire are extraordinary municipalities of the Netherlands, while Aruba, Curaçao, and St. Martin are countries within the kingdom. This constitutional structure is important within the current framework of restitution of colonial collections. Even though I will not go in depth on this aspect in the presentation, restitution is generally considered a matter between different states, rather than the return of collections between entities of the same constitutional body. Even though the islands have important common cultural and natural traits, they also have a diverse prehistorical and historical background, a different economic and social development, and therefore also a diverse population demographics. As early as the 17th century, or maybe even prior to this, Europeans have collected material from these 6 islands in the Caribbean, often sending their finds to museums and universities in the Netherlands and other European countries. A small portion of these collections have been temporarily displayed to the public within some of these institutions, but most collections have been stored in these facilities for hundreds of years, during which time they have been subjected to movement between institutions in the Netherlands and elsewhere. The first major museum collection practice of the Dutch Caribbean islands should most probably be attributed to Anton van Koolwijk. He worked on the ABC Islands in the late 19th century as a Dutch Roman Catholic priest, but had a particular interest in the Amerindian culture of the islands and in their native populations. He excavated at some sites and collected and bought archaeological, ethnographical objects and natural historical specimens from locals. He was remarkably methodical in describing and registering all his finds and acquired artifacts. These he sent to museums in the Netherlands, accompanied by letters, which are considered valuable descriptions of life on the islands during that period. His collection is housed in at least 7 museums throughout the Netherlands nowadays. Scholars, mainly Dutch, German, and French, did research on all 6 islands in the 19th and 20th century. Although their main goals may not have been to collect, their excavations and other research practices yielded significant material on all the islands, most of which were sent to the Netherlands for study. Not only artifacts were removed from the island, but also research records were not published or otherwise shared with local institutions and communities. Because of the constitutional structures and administration of the Caribbean part of the kingdom, artifacts, specimens, and records were also taken and stored in institutions like the former Archaeological Anthropological Institute of the Antilles in Curaçao and the former Caribbean Marine Biological Institute, also in Curaçao. There are several examples of the return of colonial collections to the Caribbean part of the kingdom. These would not qualify as restitution in the current definition. I would like to mention 2 of these cases. In 1983, boxes of pottery shards were sent from the former Museum of Ethnology in Leiden to the former Inniss in Curaçao. In 2007, those shards that were thought to have been excavated in Aruban archaeological sites were sent to Aruba. The characteristics of the way in which these artifacts were returned were not compatible with the contemporary definition of restitution. In 2009, 5 objects were given in long-term loan by the former Museum of Ethnology in Leiden to the National Archaeological Museum of Aruba. These artifacts, originally from Aruba, were displayed immediately in a new permanent exhibit of the Aruba Museums, officially opened for the public shortly after. This return of artifact doesn't qualify as restitution either. Collaborating on the data hub. Digital accessibility of collections in the Netherlands were key to requests for research and return. So the idea of creating a data hub of colonial collections in the Netherlands presented to stakeholders during the Opacity to Clarity conference in Leiden in 2023 initiated new collaborations. Camiel will tell you more about that in his presentation. In 2024, with my colleagues Camiel and Remy Richardson, former Heritage Inspector and current Program Deal Manager from Statia, we drafted and presented a paper on the potential of the Data Hub during the conference of the Association of Caribbean Historians at the Universidad del Magdalena in Santa Marta, Colombia. We are now collaborating on an article to be published in the Yanguapana, the journal of the university, in a special volume on restitution led by Dr. Shani Roper. Reasons to collaborate on the development of the Data Hub are numerous and include the fact that it's an inclusive tool for communities of origin to tell their stories about diasporic collections, while at the same time allowing other regional and international stakeholders to add to these narratives. I will now give the floor to Camiel to elaborate on the Data Hub. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arminda. So thank you to all for this opportunity to, from Arminda, my perspective, talk a bit about the Data Hub and about our work. So the Data Hub is a digital platform that can already be visited currently through a link that I will share in a bit. And it is a digital platform that you can see as kind of two websites that use a lot of data to make colonial collections in the Netherlands accessible. And this Data Hub is a project from the Colonial Collection Consortium in the Netherlands. And this is a consortium consisting out of 5 parties, 3 museums who administer a colonial collection, such as Museum Bombeek in Arnhem, the Rijksmuseum and the Wereldmuseum, but also an institution like the Niaah, who focuses more on provenance research, amongst others, and as well the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands, which I'm a part of. And so this consortium, amongst others, looks very much at supporting institutions, for example, in the Netherlands in provenance research, but also international knowledge sharing, museum trainings, supporting network, and also the accessibility of colonial collections in the Netherlands. And this, I think, is also the central aspect of the Data Hub, and the 2 questions that we try to look at. Which colonial collections are present in the Netherlands, which is the question of accessibility of the colonial collections, but then also how did they get here, which is the provenance side of all this, this topic. And so within the platform, we try to dive into both aspects and formulate an answer to both questions. As Arminda already alluded to, we started building this platform in the spring of 2023, and we did so by first looking at how are we able to create such a platform, and what should the platform be able to do. And to answer these questions, we organized as a consortium a workshop with all international participants and colleagues, heritage specialists, to look at which problems are we tackling, but then also which solutions can we provide and how can we implement those solutions. And for the following of the presentation, I will be looking at some of these functionalities that we created on the platform. Now, this Data Hub has different elements that you can visit. You can explore all the data that we bring together from these collections through, for example, a research application, which you can see in the architecture drawing on the top right. But then as well, we have a website where you can see what data is in the Data Hub, which is the dataset register. And both those kind of websites, web applications, they use the data that we bring together from different collections. And these collections you can see at the bottom of this drawing. So, for example, the Wereldmuseum, Museum Bombeek, and the Rijksmuseum. In order to bring this data together, we also do things with the data. So we transform it to linked open data This is a way to better connect the data, but also to make it accessible and open for not only the websites that we're using the data for, but also for any other person or organization who's interested in using the data. So that's a very important principle, the kind of like the fair ones, and how this data is open. As I mentioned, we have on one side the dataset browser, which you can visit through the QR code or the link. This is an environment where you can see which datasets are present in the data hub, and also look at certain metrics of how accessible they are. For example, which language are they in, which format, and things like their license. But then kind of the heart of this data hub is really at the research application. You can visit again this research application through the QR code or the link. And in this research application, we really give shape to these conversations that we have in, for example, the workshop. So you can search these different collections at the same time and filter on, for example, things like materials or location of creation. So you can see all the records that are from a certain location. But one of the really important functionalities that we also created in all these conversations is the community functionality. So on the platform, you can create a community, and as a community, you can do certain things. And this is really to kind of like emphasize this important aspect of kind of the communities within the topic of colonial collections. You can, for example, bring heritage together, belongings together through, for example, lists. And these lists can be composed of items from these different collections. And when you would, for example, click on one of these items, you would see metadata. So, for example, the title or the description that the museum gave to, for example, this record or the belonging. And because this information often is very one-sided and might be incorrect, it was very important to have a way to address this. So, for example, to add narratives to these metadata descriptions as a community on behalf of a community. And so, as an example, you can see that there is a description, but then it has an edited narrative that you can see it's provided by somebody and also on behalf of a community. And if there are sources that are also part of this narrative, these ones are also visible. And these narratives are independent. So they're not thereafter owned by the platform, for example, but still by the person who published a narrative. And giving context to kind of the heritage that you find on the platform is, of course, a very important thing. And another way to do that is also the local context notices, which are certain labels that you can give to a belonging to tell more about how, for example, it should be treated, what context you should view it in. And that is also a way to provide a bit more context and information to heritage. Then as well, of course, we have the provenance side of colonial collections. And provenance information that is available is also shown with each object. And as a user, you can also add to that information. This is also a way to not only make available which colonial collections we have in the Netherlands, but also what provenance information is attached to these objects. And last, on the platform, there's also more background information on collections, certain collectors, through digital research aids. And these are written by the Niaah, and they give more background information and assistance in conducting provenance research on these collections. And so we try to kind of assist the user in different ways as well through these research aids. So currently we are focusing on getting this data that you can find on the platform as good as possible and including as much as data as possible from the consortium partners. But of course, we are also looking at data sets from outside of the consortium in the Netherlands, and including those as well. So the colonial collections in the Netherlands become as accessible as possible, and therefore also the policy that we have in the Netherlands on colonial collections also can have more of this accessibility tied towards these collections. And of course, we're also looking at more platform activations, such as webinars and video tutorials, and how to engage with the platform. So I think this was our contribution. If you have questions, please pose them or send them afterwards. We're very happy and welcome to answer them.
Thank you so much, Camiel and Arminda. Fascinating project with implications for not only clearly within the context of the Netherlands and the overseas territories there, but certainly one that can translate to become applicable for regions such as the Caribbean across colonial powers, former colonial powers, and territories. Thank you so much for that. We'll now hear from Rita Fooh, Director of the National Archives, Suriname, for her presentation.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon to all. My presentation will be on the experience we have about the restitution of the Suriname archives, and I will address the processes, negotiations, and the way forward. Suriname was ruled by the Dutch between 1650 and 1975. And the colonial oppressors created detailed record-keeping systems to manage their large empires. And this system was needed to share information quickly, enforce the same rules everywhere, keep order, and keep an eye on any signs of resistance. So the archives were or are a reflection of the colonial power and administration structure at that time. Between 1960 and 1975, these archives were transferred to the National Archives of the Netherlands. And what was the reason to transfer them to the Netherlands? The physical condition of the archives was seriously deteriorated due to long storage in tropical condition. And in the course of the 20th century, a number of archives were transferred in the Netherlands. In total, 802 linear meters were shipped to The Hague. And at the first transfer in 1916, it was expressly stated in the report and also in the receipt that the archives in question had to be placed in the general state in The Hague for safekeeping and on loan under the express reservation that they remain the property of the colony, and in this case, the Republic of Suriname. And as soon as Suriname has a modern archive building built according to the international standards, the archive were to return to the country. So when Suriname started to build their new archive repository in 2006, a journalist interviewed me and also the former Minister of Home Affairs responsible for archives. And in that article, we explicitly mentioned, and in Dutch, Suriname wil archieven terug uit Nederland. And translated that in English, Suriname want their archives back from the Netherlands. So the former Minister of Foreign Affairs from the Netherlands, Ministry of Home Affairs, then started discussion on political level about our wish, but also our request to return these archives. Ownership was not an issue because it was clearly mentioned in the report and the receipt. So we started the negotiation between National Archives and the National Archives of the Netherlands between 2008 till 2010. These discussions were sometimes very conflicting, but sometimes because there were different interests, the process for the negotiation was not always very pleasant. The returning condition from the Netherlands was explicitly that Suriname has to have an adequate facility, trained staff, and archival legislation. So looking at restitution policy regulation in an international context, we see that in 1949, the Netherlands already transferred ownership of the management of archives of Dutch administrative bodies in Asia to the Republic of Indonesia in 1949. And in recent decades, we see in 1983, under the flag of the United States, that the convention was drawn entitled the Vienna Convention on Succession of States in Respect of State Property, Archives, and Debt. And this convention has not yet entered into force. A pity, in fact, because the conventions, in essence, on restitution is that archives should follow the territory and its people, especially when needed for governance or tied to historical identity. Where full return is not possible, access and cooperation become mandatory institutions. So this Vienna Convention has not yet been approved and not into force yet. So looking at other initiative and also on international level, with regards to the International Council on Archive, in 2016, they established an expert group on shared archival heritage, EXA, and this was to provide a forum for discussion and ultimately resolution of issues related to archives pertaining the history and cultural heritage of more than one community, country, or region, where custody, ownership, and access is unclear or in dispute. So on the website of the ICA, the expert group on shared archival heritage has also a list of resources, and I will share the link in a minute. With regards to the Netherlands, when developing policy on the restitution of colonial collection, and Camiel already mentioned it, in 2020, the Netherlands developed a policy on the restitution of colonial objects. However, archives was not included in that policy brief or the advice of the Council of Culture. And in 2024, the Netherlands developed drafted advice report, adviesrapport omgaan koloniale bronnen van gedeeld erfgoed. And in English, how to deal with shared resources about the colonial past. This is about the policy in international context, and I'm glad also my colleague Katarina mentioned the lack of policy in France. So we started the negotiation back to Suriname and the Netherlands. We started the negotiation process between Suriname and the Netherlands. My colleague at that time, we discussed the period of the restitution. about the timetable for the restitution, the preservation, digitalization, and online access. At first, our request was to have the archives return in 3 years after the inauguration of our archive building. For the Netherlands, that was not done. They wanted to digitalize the archives first. And by that time, in 2009, they even mentioned within 10 years. We had a long discussion, difficult discussion about this timetable because in our view, these archives were in the Netherlands about 100 years. And Suriname had to wait yet again 10 years for the restitution to happen. So this was really a constraining issue between us during the negotiation. For us, online accessibility was not a priority at that time. For the Netherlands, their argument was the service to the public has to be ongoing, and that must be guaranteed before the archives can be returned to Suriname. And by that time, we also mentioned that we wanted a digital copy of archives related to Suriname formed in the Netherlands. The colleagues over there mentioned it was not part of the agreement, but our agreement, our motive was if the Netherlands requests a digital copy of our archives, then it's in our right to also request a digital copy of the archives in the Netherlands relating to Suriname. A second constraining points during the negotiation was the conservation methods of the archives. Because of the thick registers, the spines of the thick registers has to cut open in the back of the registers, and that was also a difficult point as well during the discussion, because when we transferred the archives to the Netherlands, they were in good condition. But are you going to return these archives with open backs of the registers, loose papers, and so on? So for a long time, we had a discussion about this. And another concern was also the online access of digital files. Suriname didn't have the technical infrastructure yet, not the advanced website. And the Netherlands, they decided after a long discussion to also invest in a new technical infrastructure for Suriname. So as important during this negotiation was also to remember, returning and repatriating all these archives to the Caribbean or to a country in what part of the world that may, returning the archives is important, but we also have to invest in the technical infrastructure in our case, the Caribbean. Not only technical infrastructure, but also staff and capacity. So in 2009, we reached an agreement. This agreement was signed in The Hague. And in the end, the restitution of the archives was within 7 years. All the archives have been digitalized, and the Suriname staff were involved in conservation activities. All the scans are now online, both on the website of the National Archives of Suriname and the Netherlands as well. The restitution happened in 2010, 2015, 17, and 2018. And now all these scans are accessible through our website. 55 million scan, about 275 terabytes. The archives are also online with the inventory. So, but moving forward, restitution, I already mentioned, is important to our people and nation who have been marginalized for a long time in history. But in order to decolonize our history, our people need direct access to their heritage by, for instance, using digital technology, using software programs such as transcribers to make them easily readable and accessible to communities in order to understand and also interpret their history. However, this is a critical note. We also have to look and also think about the principle of provenance for digitalized documentary heritage or culture objects. Recently, the Caribbean branch of the International Council on Archives, CARBICA, have seen 2 cases with regards to Suriname and also Curaçao, where documentary heritage have been digitalized and also put in useful databases, but those files were stored and also hosted in Europe. So therefore, their heritage was put under European jurisdiction. For instance, open data legislation, open for commercial use, and where countries of origin, and in this case Caribbean, mostly do not have or may not support free use of digitized content. So in this case, we have to be critical and also look at our technical infrastructure and our own legislation. So furthermore, with regards to research, we also publish research guide recording oral histories and so on, because these colonial archives were formed by the former colonies. They mostly are about how they exercise power on our people. So we have to look at the documents from our own perspectives. So that's why we invested in young professionals to do some research in these archives. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rita. Your presentation has, in fact, highlighted, through the case of Suriname, the limitations around restitution in the Dutch context. I think that this is important work. The fact is that we need to develop the necessary, even legislative instruments for the project of decolonization and creating access to these historical archives that we have been denied access to. So our final presenter before our discussant respondent, Mrs. Charlene Riley. She's an archivist and of course serves now as a university archivist for the University of the West Indies. Over to you, Charlene.
Hello, yes, so my Wi-Fi chose the most inopportune time to become disconnected, but I'm here.
Yes, yeah, and your screen, your sharing is coming up.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, colleagues and fellow presenters. So this morning, I would like, let me get to the top. I would like to share some reflections on the role of repatriation of Caribbean records in the context of our ongoing journey on reparatory justice and restitution. So my reflections today, and let me see if I can get my video on. Yeah, so my reflections today, it's not just on one particular Caribbean country. I'm Trinidadian. I have worked at the National Archives in Trinidad and Tobago, but my reflections today it comes from the position of a university archives, and the University of the West Indies has, from many years early in its life, taken an interest in archival development in the Caribbean. Let's see if we can move this. Yes, so the UWI Archives has a regional focus where we, apart from our own collecting and managing of our collection, try to perform an advocacy role in promoting the ongoing development of the archival profession in the region. And as I said, this has been from early in the life of the UWI. Even before we had a formal archival program established, the UWI was instrumental in an early survey of archival records in the Caribbean and was responsible for working with partners to host the first Caribbean Archives Conference in 1965. So part of our focus involves seeking to collect records which complement the official records, but also importantly, provides context in terms of persons, events, and overall activities important to recounting our history in the university and the region it serves. So I want to just look broadly today because I think it's really important why archives matter in this whole movement for reparatory justice and restitution. And I'll just look at my top point here. And this comes from the International Council on Archives. And it talks about the importance of archives as contemporary records, right, created by our individuals and organizations. And I like the phrase that they provide a direct window on past events. And anytime we are speaking about windows to our past, I believe that's a very important aspect of any program for reparation, restitution. So archives matter tremendously in this movement. So I'm just going to go through this, a very brief reminder. We are all aware of the losses we suffered. And the losses were for many reasons and in many ways. Some were deliberate destruction of sensitive records, deemed sensitive by the former colonial powers, removal of archives to foreign countries, selective transfer and concealment of records and archives, especially at that transitional time just before independence movement in the Caribbean. And apart from the deliberate, if that wasn't bad enough, apart from the deliberate destruction to cover up or just keep hidden certain actions, there were dubious disposition actions during the period of that rule. One example in 1948, when a massive amount of files were discarded, quoting into the sea between Trinidad and Tobago, and the reason given was overcrowding in the vault. So we have lost a lot. I know we're all aware of that, but sometimes it is useful to take a look back, and from the point of view of archival professionals, records managers, it is a very unhappy and scary thought in terms of what we've lost there and probably would not be able to get back. So in terms of our losses, bear in mind in our losses and our efforts for reparatory justice, what role does the repatriation of archives play? An extremely important one. We are aware of the many reasons why we need to have our archives repatriated. A few of them mentioned here in terms of filling gaps in our governance and other history. Having records repatriated are in themselves, that action in itself acknowledges again the injustices and the harm caused by colonial exploitation. Matters relating to cultural identity, as my fellow presenters have spoken about. And I'm a firm believer that records and archives are critical to informing social repair, social development, and policy making in any country. So these are reasons why archives are a center part of our reparatory justice movement. But further, we need to look at the fact that archives presents and provides the type of evidence needed both for individuals and nations to assert their rights, that the archives of themselves are a pivotal and a critical part of ongoing claims or cases for restitution and reparatory justice. They are a roadmap to items and issues that we should be looking at. And I think sometimes this could probably be overlooked. So we have many reasons why the repatriation of archives should be looked at as an important component of our reparatory justice journey. So our discussions today involve pathways to repatriation and restitution. And I don't know if all of these examples, which are ongoing projects, fit the definitions entirely, but what I would say is that in each of them, there's an element that can help us close some gaps. So we've heard our colleague just spoke of the return of physical records resulting from negotiations with the former colonial government. So that has played an important part in the past and continues to be items of negotiations from individual countries. Of course, there's digital repatriation, which seems like a middle ground for most persons because it means that creation of digital copies of records can go on without persons losing custody of the records. So one of the large projects that has been ongoing for many years out of the National Archives in UK is the FCO 141 project, where a digitization effort is ongoing for records from former colonies. Of course, there's the route of gaining access to digital repositories, which are normally behind paywalls. And I know, for instance, that students, researchers, lecturers at the university either have been or soon will gain access to the Adam Matthew Colonial Caribbean project. And then, of course, there are collaborations on research initiatives, and one that is right now being rolled out is another project coming out of the National Archives UK, the Passage Project, which is funded, interestingly, by Lloyd's Register Foundation. So there are a variety of ways where we can seek to have records repatriated. A lot of it is not entirely in our hands. It's not entirely in our hands, and it's not the type of relationships we always have the best advantage, but these are some avenues. The other thing I want to highlight has to do with professional partnerships. And while these may not get a lot of recognition, this is something that can happen in our everyday work as professionals in the archives and information management space. So I want to touch quickly on some of the barriers. We know them that exist to repatriation of our records. Rita just gave us a very good example in their negotiations, even in a space where plans and agreements had been made before, the type of barriers that they face. So they are political to begin with, where persons want nothing to do with the return of documents or anything else that can tie them to the whole concept of reparations. So we have that difficulty. Sometimes we have difficulties even when there is a high-level agreement for reparations or repatriation, where institutions themselves may throw up administrative blockages to actually having the records returned. And of course, there's funding shortages and operational and logistic setbacks. The FCO project at the National Archives UK has been ongoing for a while, but they have run into some difficulties where some of the records have been sprayed with some chemicals that may be damaging to humans. So that has put a check on the actual pace of digitizing these records. So I want to look at another barrier, and I think it's an important one for us in our community to look at. So in our overall reparation discussions and agreements and restitutions, we need to remember at all times that archives should always find a place in these agreements. A writer, a person who used to work at the UK National Archives and who has done a lot of work in this area, Mandy Banton, described what she considered in an article, what she considered some focus, the focus on artifacts versus what she calls dusty files. Both are extremely important, but we have found many times in agreements that the archives part is not enforced, I should say not even enforced, but not as well developed as a part of the agreement. And as we've discussed before, it is important to us as any other article or cultural objects, and it is important to us even as we continue with the ongoing work of reparatory justice. So this is something that we need to look at on our side to always insist on repatriation of archives, even to accompany other cultural objects which are being repatriated. So I mentioned professional collaboration, and looking at it from the focus point of a university archives and one in the Caribbean region, what we try to do, while we cannot speak as a national archives and do negotiation with other countries, we can, however, try to do our part with our partners, our fellow university archives. And our approach really is to work with archives who very often, university archives, have great collections donated by industries which are specific to their cities or their regions, or persons from their university who have done significant work in our region, right? So we work with colleagues to identify these and seek to share access to these collections to see how we can supplement and fill gaps in our regional history. They are not formal repatriation projects, but the objective is achieved, right? Apart from that, so a crucial tool, I should say, in this is digitization. Because as we partner with the universities, we are not seeking for them to give us their records, but to share with us. I'm looking at my time. Yes. So some of the initiatives that we are currently involved with, one particular university archives has a collection from a confectionery company, which was located in their area in the 1700s, 1800s, and which had estates in the Caribbean, I believe Jamaica, Grenada, one other country. And those papers will fill some gaps for us and give us more insight. We are also looking at another collection of papers from a British sociologist who's a welfare advisor in Jamaica. I discussed this with my colleague, Dr. Roper, who's very much in favor of us trying to acquire these, and a collection from another regional historian and politician during the 1917-2023. And this person moved from country to country, and his papers are being offered to one of our university archives, and we have agreed to work together to share that information. We continue to try to work with our colleagues at the University of Glasgow Archives in terms of continuing our conversations on sharing of records. Also, we are focusing on collecting contemporary information on that partnership between Glasgow and the UWI, because it is groundbreaking, and we have to ensure that our collecting of this particular project is on point. In our advocacy role, we continue to have conversations with the UK National Archives, rated timeline for our Caribbean records to be digitized as part of the FCO project. It's a huge project and there's many countries involved, but it is necessary for us to keep our voice, make sure our voice is heard, and say we also are looking forward to having our records digitized and returned. And this is coming out of that project that I think was around 2011, coming out of the whole court case with the concealed archives, as they are often referred to. So we continue to play an advocacy role in this area. For us, what we are focusing on is trying to fill some gaps and being that resource that the university, the UWI, has always been a space where you can find information on all of the countries, the region that it serves. In closing, I want to quote a phrase from Shakespeare, I think it's The Tempest, that archives and archivists over throughout the world seem to have adopted. What's past is prologue. And it speaks in many ways to our past, of course, being important to our future. It also speaks to what has happened in the past can very much again happen in the future. So in terms of how we go forward, we need to remember as collectors that some of the conditions that existed when we lost records, we may not be in a colonial situation, but there were reasons why records were suppressed, and these motivations have never gone away. So we have to be careful in our collecting going forward. Another thing to look at in our future, Rita mentioned, is the whole digital movement. To digitize, which is really helpful and can be important to us, but it can be a two-edged sword. And that, I think, is a topic for a whole other seminar. But for us as a university archives, we continue to look at addressing gaps in the collections, expanding our digital repatriation, sharing efforts with our fellow university archives, and participating in international organizations' efforts for repatriation. Rita spoke about the ICA, an organization that has done a lot in the past to bring assistance to our region and other post-colonial societies around the world. And I think it's important to remain open to the multiple ways of recovering our documentary history. Some are more formal than others, but there are ways as professionals that we can be intentional and work with persons who are willing to work with us in bringing some of this information to light and having it available where all researchers and interested persons in our region can have access. So in conclusion, just again to stress that archives and our repatriated archives form a very, very important part in our drive and our efforts for reparatory justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlene. I think highlighting the importance of advocacy, the role in support of capacity building for archival records management and access in the Caribbean. You have, in a sense, taken us back to basics, highlighting also the matter of access, especially behind paywalls, and the ways in which collaboration, including on research initiatives, is in fact the digitization. You put AI in the mix and you have a whole nother, you are right, it requires a whole nother webinar just to deal with the challenges around digitization or digitalization, whichever word is best suited here. I think also I'm hearing that despite disadvantages and the limitations and even the barriers, whether funding, political, institutional barriers, and so on, we need to intervene. We must always intervene, because when we talk about archives, when we talk about this kind of restitution, we are in fact talking about access to the lives that we were never privileged enough to to be able to engage with. In fact, these are the lives of our ancestors that we're talking about. And I must say that your contribution here at the end, perhaps maybe should have been at the beginning, but we are back squarely in the same vein on the important points. I'm left now, therefore, to hand over to Dr. Tara Inniss, who will give us her response to these presentations. And then I'm hoping that we will have some time to at least take some questions. I see one that has already been posted in the chat. I see the comments. Thank you, as usual, to Dr. Alice Corbell, who has been posting important links. And of course, again, welcome to our audience online via our YouTube channels and so on. Please, Dr. Inniss, over to you.
Thank you. And I really want to make sure that we have time for questions. So I'm not going to be too long, but I think you all have heard, these fantastic contributions and heard really how challenging it is within the Caribbean space because of our geopolitical differences, linguistic differences, being political dependencies, independent territories, all of the challenges that we face. But I think you can also see that we have some ways that we can move forward, some good examples, some best practice. So I'm just going to try to identify some of those, but also highlight some challenges. And I was very I've heard that the CARICOM 10-point plan is being revised, but I wonder to what extent it's really interacting or engaging with so many of our very valued heritage practitioners in the region who are at the forefront of this work. And I just want to remind everyone that the CARICOM 10-point plan is not directed to any one former imperial power. Several Caribbean member states have been colonized by multiple imperial powers over the course of their colonial histories. Anglophone Caribbean states are overrepresented in the regional body, and therefore Britain tends to be a focus of many claims. But both Haiti and Suriname are members as well, and these are independent territories as well. So claims have been directed to both France and the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Of course, we could talk about the Danish, Denmark as a government as well, who had occupation of the Virgin Islands. But where Britain as a state has historically resisted engagement in the past, we see both France and the Netherlands having recently acknowledged some claims and are in different phases of their engagements with former colonies. It is also worth noting that dependent territories in the region have also been seeking CARICOM member status, and I think this has to be brought into the discussion as well. So we see that these are dependencies or constituent countries of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. The Hispanophone Caribbean has not traditionally been engaged with the CARICOM 10-point plan in any formal way, although Puerto Rico has articulated a 6-point plan, mostly directed to the US. Neither Cuba nor the Dominican Republic have engaged formally with reparations as a national priority. However, Cuba has expressed support for CARICOM's attempts. So the entangled geopolitical landscape can make it hard to articulate a clear position on repertory frameworks across the region. But the CARICOM 10-point plan seems to have found fertile ground in several non-member states. It is held up as an important model regionally. However, as a framework, it does not provide an operational structure which may guide heritage practitioners, so archaeologists and museum professionals, archivists must rely on their own training and professional standards, as well as institutional mandates to guide interventions that may be desired on an institutional or community or even national level. Most CARICOM member states have acceded to cultural conventions under the UNESCO framework that address stolen or looted cultural property, but these do not address retroactive claims. So we're kind of in this quagmire of all of these things that are happening at the same time and trying to sort it out politically at a state level. But even for us as practitioners, it becomes a bit of a minefield. The CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice outlines a regional framework for addressing historical injustices, but it offers very limited guidance on heritage-related restitution. While it mentions repatriation, for example, only in the idea of voluntary resettlement of Caribbean people in Africa, it gestures indirectly towards heritage concerns through its Indigenous Development Program, and it calls for strengthening cultural institutions as spaces of repair. However, neither the plan nor existing national cultural policies provide clear mechanisms for identifying, requesting, or even receiving the return of objects removed during the colonial period or even after. This gap has complicated recent restitution efforts, particularly amid uncertainty about institutional authority and resource limitations within the region's galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. Although Britain remains a primary focus of claims, the plan also informs engagements with other former colonial powers, and its influence obviously extends now beyond CARICOM membership. One of the areas that I think we need to explore, given the presentations from a regional perspective, is how to engage our regional professional organizations to advise on debates and mechanisms to shape both practice and policy. We have long-standing regional heritage organizations such as CARBICA, MAC, IACA, and the ACH, which already have academic and professional-led responsibility over theory and practice in the region. But we scarcely embrace or empower their leadership in setting regional agendas for these discussions. So I want us to kind of think about this as well. To my knowledge, they have not been engaged meaningfully in the work of CARICOM, and UWI and other regional institutions also have a role to play, as we saw with Charlene's presentation, in creating a supportive research and capacity development environment for this work. UWI provides individual academic support to its own researchers and at times is called on to support the organization of regional meetings, but there is a research agenda here that needs support as well. And I think I want to call on CARICOM again for the idea of setting priorities for research, not just in this field, but in many fields in the region, for our own researchers to take advantage of, so we can solve our own problems and concerns. I would like this to be an integrated framework that supports ethical best practice for the professional development and appreciation of the work and commitment of the region's archivists, historians, museum professionals, and archaeologists. From the papers, this also needs to be practice-led. We have examples through which toolkits can be developed. We have mechanisms to share, but these cannot be politicized spaces in which state politics invariably takes the lead while also silencing the many voices that can be heard at this table. At the end of the day, communities have to be centered in this process to help manage results and create spaces in which repatriated or restituted artifacts or collections inhabit and take root. UWI and other TLIs, tertiary learning institutions, also now have a renewed mandate to ensure that the region develops a cadre of trained professionals to support this work. Absent from many of these models is a recognition that the heritage sector needs to move from one that just supports the development of extractive models of heritage tourism to the genuine development of professionals who work within reparatory justice frameworks for the benefit of their communities. The two objectives do not sit well together in most of the region, and this can compromise the work of galleries, libraries, and museums, archives and museums. For this work to be prioritized, it has to be funded and valued both nationally and regionally. But in a time when many states are rationalizing the development and resourcing of academic programs, we see a contraction in the market to support careers and professional development in these areas. History needs to be taught in schools. History programs need to be developed across the region. Archaeology needs supportive frameworks for teaching and learning, and legislative protections to support professional development in the field. Librarians and archivists cannot be sacrificed sacrifice to the vicissitudes of artificial intelligence and technology. In fact, they need to be positioned as strict guardians of our heritage, and I'm taking that quote from our anthem in Barbados. In short, this is not only hard, if not traumatic work, and it's painstaking work, but it needs to be valued work, and we need to be seen as part of the solution, sitting at the table of many of these discussions that are taking place. If we were to go back to some of the questions, just to raise a few questions from the papers, in Katarina's presentation, for example, I wonder to what extent such a measure to include legal restitution to French overseas territories may create some challenges for any French or province or state territory to also reclaim their own artifacts from within the French state and possibly centralize collections within France and French institutions. And I wonder to what extent this may also pose a challenge to the French authorities, unless there's a mechanism here that might be leveraged to transfer artifacts held centrally to community or provincial repositories. I really liked in Camiel and Arminda's presentation where they set up the Netherlands as a prime example here and produces a workable framework that really does center communities. But there are also critical questions that all of us will have to ask if this kind of model is transferred. Who owns both the physical and digital object? Can it be owned? Who controls the meanings inscribed in the metadata? Who hosts? Are the digital skills and capacities required to manage these collections shared, or are they directed? Even if they have been worked out for the Kingdom of the Netherlands, they still have to be worked out everywhere else. And the ethics of data sovereignty are increasingly being subsumed under the state in the independent Caribbean, creating challenging pathways to ensure these discussions are actually led by professionals working with communities and not just top-down processes which pull everything here under the state umbrella. In Rita's presentation, I think we can consider that the process of archives transfer was negotiations around restitution, not only repatriation, given the conditions that Suriname had to meet to receive the archives. What were the discussions in the negotiations that addressed the capacity building and the resource gaps? And I think you spoke a little bit about this as well, but that has to be part of the discussion for us all. It can't be that we're just digitizing records in one place and sharing them with somewhere else, or transferring physical archives and not recognizing that the loss that was incurred, that Charlene spoke about, didn't actually create a kind of major gap, a rupture that we also have to address in repair as well. So I just wanted to kind of bring those ideas into the space, and I hope that everybody else has some really great questions to ask. I'm very grateful to be part of this panel and to have heard all of what is happening. And I hope others here will be able to get some more information to continue this work as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara. The question of data sovereignty, including for communities denied access, is a major issue. I think we underscore from your response the fact that the work we do as institutions is ultimately for ordinary people. This is not an exercise for some kind of hairy-fairy purpose. It is, for many of us, an existential issue. And that institutions such as, the tertiary institutions in which we find ourselves, or institutions of government or associated quasi-governmental institutions, or ministries, departments, and agencies of government, we have a role to play, and that role is in service to people. I think that's something that we forget often when we talk about archives. We can get lost in the objects, but not get lost in the purpose. I want to now open for questions. I see there was a question to Camiel, who has responded. And I'm not sure I've seen Any other question? I see quite a few comments. Thanks to the panelists for the beautiful presentations. That's a sentiment we have seen. I want to again thank Dr. Corbel. She has been really engaged and is quite consistent with our webinars. Charlene, do you have a response? Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. So the question concerning whether I meant to say contemporary or past records, actually it was contemporary. It was a quote from the ICA definition. And what they were getting at is that the records, they were contemporary to the time. So it's contemporary records based on the activities of persons at that particular time. So it wasn't really the focus on past, but emphasizing that archives really are a contemporary view, a view of what was done and recorded at a time when all of the activities were taking place. I don't know if that explains it, but they wanted to focus on the fact that this window is a window into the past and that the records were created at the time of which the activities were taking place.
Of course, the other conundrum for us, thank you for your response there, Charlene. The other conundrum for us, I think, which was squarely positioned in the first presentation, is that we can also get lost in this question of data. But in fact, some of these matters for restitution relate to objects, and some of these objects relate to ancestral remains. So that, questions around data, we must in fact be able to not just separate, but find that inclusive context for understanding that some of these objects are in fact bodies. They're not just objects. They're not just, data, not just words, not just paper, not just archives. All right. Any other questions, comments?
Sorry, Prof.
Yes.
Tara had posed a question for Katarina in her response. Or I think there was a comment for Katarina to respond to in Tara's response. So I don't know.
I'm not seeing that.
No, when Tara was speaking.
When she was speaking, but Tara, if you can reply, because it was long and I need to summarize it to be able to reply to you.
Right. So I was just asking whether, so in the French, in France, is there any mechanism to move objects from central repositories to communities within France, in the sense that, like, for example, if you have something from Provence that is essentially, Provençal, can something move from Paris to Provence easily, or is it something that is really not done? They haven't really embraced this idea of even the idea of community within those spaces there.
For what I know, no, it's not something done yet. The thing you will do, like, it's to borrow things from your own communities, from the original place where it was, but there is not a kind of transfer. That's why I was talking about transfer of object and or bonds, but it's not done. It's not something done on the mainland, and even worse for the overseas territories. But it's something we can bring, at least start with ICOM France, probably, but in France, restitution and reparation, it's mixed, and France, it's still afraid when you want to talk about those questions of reparation, because this year we will have the 25th years anniversary of the law recognizing slavery crime against humanity, and it's a long process for France to admit this part of his history And when you want to, you know, it's like everything it's put in the same mix. If you ask for restitution, it's like you want reparation and you want money, and it's like it's and the French government block, and they can, you know, they stop the discussion. It's like you don't want to be part of France. You want to you know, you want to split the nation, and they put all those questions in this kind of, even on the mainland, like Marseille, or the part like Alsace, which close by Germany. When they ask, it's like you want to split the nation, and all those questions are mixed and make a mess. And that's why it's difficult to talk about those topics. And for a long time, also those topics were bring by European, French people from the mainland, and more researchers from the diaspora start and embrace those topics, and will, you know, step by step, we'll go through it.
Thank you so much, Katarina. I don't see any other questions in the chat. And unless someone has Odi, I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's been really very, very interesting, because coming from Africa and been working with some of my Caribbean friends, and I always see this gap. So my reflection, so African and Caribbean communities in Europe are already connected through the same colonial archives. Slave register, vessel logs, and trade records are linked both regions. The issue is that these histories have been separated through colonial classification. The task now is to reread and connect them through collaborative research, digital mapping, and shared interpretation. Because if we don't reconnecting to the Africans and Caribbeans here, for example, the Benin bronze, they call it Benin bronze, it takes away a lot from it, the genealogy of the Benin bronze. So the Benin bronze is made from Manila. Manila is a currency used during the slavery. So when the Europeans conceptualized the Benin bronze, then they actually hiding behind the real story. So kind of validating imperialism in Nigeria or within the African concept. So so that link, so whatever the archive supports the all the artifacts, because the artifacts, how it's been interpreted by the Europeans, like I just said now about the Benin bronze, and then that dislocates Africa. It dislocates our own personhood, Black people, and that holds trauma. And so with that, sitting in British Museum, we can start to, it will become a door for understanding what restitution is, reparation, what that means, because the objects, they are alive. The archive is alive too. So that is where I'm coming from. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I've waffled a little bit.
That's totally fine. Thank you for your contributions, Odi. I did read them in the chat as well and responded to you too. I think we have come to the point of clarity. I think clarity is a good word here. I think we have come to the point of clarity on challenges faced in the context of this kind of restitution, the sorts of alliances and collaborations necessary, including across research and digitization at funding sources. I think we also, in the context of the geopolitical challenges, understand that where the Caribbean is concerned, it is not a homogeneous region. Where French overseas or Dutch overseas territories are concerned, they are not homogeneous either. And so the case is brought in the context of presentations from Katarina Rita, and so on, we know that, and Charlene, that these are clear ways to understand the kind of complexity in the context of colonial restitution. So I want to thank you all for these contributions. I think that we are on to excavating in a way that Dr. Inniss responded in relation to gaps, for example, in our own development plan, the CARICOM 10-point plan, which is being revised, and which may not, in its revision, deal specifically with some of these questions, but of course would provide an interesting way to conceptualize development across this kind of restitution. The importance here is that we have to take a 360-degree approach to this question of reparatory justice. That restitution, that repair, that reparation, that repatriation, these are multi-dimensional, transdisciplinary, transnational questions. And the work continues. I want to say a luta continua, because we are, in fact, with a completely important responsibility and mission, must take on, must continue to intervene, must continue to educate, and must continue to build capacity in the context of this question of reparatory justice. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks to our speakers. Thanks in particular, Dr. Shani Roper from the UWI Museum. Thanks to our technical team. Thanks to the support team from the Center for Reparation Research. We are truly, truly grateful for your support. And thank you to the audience. We could not have had our discussion without you. Thank you so much all for joining us. Stay tuned for another in our series of webinars. Go to the CRR's YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram at CRR_UWI, UWI Museum on Instagram as well. See you next time. Thank you so much.